Hello, I'm Lauren Wenzel. I'm with IUCN's World Commission on Protected Areas, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's session. We are going to be hearing about how MPAs can persevere through adversity, and this is hosted by Octo. And we have also with us John Davis, who's the founder and president of Octo, and Sarah Carr, the chief knowledge broker at Octo. And John and Sarah and I are going to share the facilitation so that we can really hopefully get a great dialogue going after we hear from our speakers, because we definitely want to hear from you, hear your stories and comments and observations and questions. So the theme of today's session is about persevering through adversity. Marine protected areas can be a really valuable tool for conservation, and they provide critical benefits to communities, but they can also face a lot of challenges, including opposition from the fishing industry and from communities, shifts in government support, and political instability, funding crises, deliberate misinformation, and differences in interpreting scientific information, and natural disasters and climate change. And challenges like these can emerge at any point during an MPA's establishment, from the very beginning through the middle of management. And they can really derail an MPA's progress toward achieving its goals. And so we're going to talk about how MPAs can persevere through these types of adversity and the factors and strategies that allow MPAs to be successful and make progress. And we have 4 experts with us from different parts of the globe who are going to be sharing their experiences. We're really fortunate to have people with a lot of different kinds of experiences. And we also know that all of you on this call have a lot of experience and interest and background in these issues. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you via the chat or the Q&A, and bringing you into the conversation. So I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then we're going to hear from each of them in turn, give a short presentation on their work, and then we will open it up to our conversation. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce Alex Hearn. He's a professor and researcher at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito and the Galapagos Science Center, and has worked in the Galapagos Islands since 2002 on fisheries research and management, and spearheaded the development of the shark research program since 2006. Alex recently led the multi-institutional team of biologists to develop a blueprint for improved conservation of the open waters outside the Galapagos Marine Reserve, a process that resulted in the creation of the new Hearn Reserve in 2022. Our next speaker is Naya Lewis. She's the director of Big Ocean and was born and raised on Oahu, Hawaii. Naya brings over 2 decades of cross-sectoral experience to uplift knowledge, integration, creative expression, and community resilience. And she works at Big Ocean, which is a global network of large-scale marine protected areas. And there she builds collaborative partnerships, amplifies indigenous leadership, and bridges ancestral wisdom with contemporary science to improve how we can care for the ocean. Professor Kerry heads the Marine Program Management Program and is the principal scientist at the South African National Biodiversity Institute. She works across the science policy continuum and is committed to the translation of science into decision-making and building capacity in African marine science and management. After 10 years of systematic planning, she helped advance the implementation of 20 new marine protected areas in South Africa through a presidential Blue Economy initiative. And our last speaker is Alan White. He is the president of the board of Coastal Conservation and Educational Foundation in the Philippines. Alan has experience in all aspects of coastal management from 30 years of fieldwork in Southeast Asia, and has undertaken studies on the management, conservation, ecology, and economics of coastal resource systems and marine protected areas. So I'm now going to turn the floor over to each of our panelists to give a presentation on key aspects of their work related to MPA perseverance. And first, we will hear from Alex Hearn. Thanks.
All right. Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen here in a sec. Where are we? No, start again. There we go. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's always interesting to share experiences and different MPAs across the world and the kind of challenges we have and how we've overcome them. As Lauren said, I work in Galapagos, and I think I'm very lucky, and Galapagos is very lucky because it's a name, it's a word that inspires a lot of reaction from people all over the planet. And to be honest with you all, I think that's one of the keys to the success of the Galapagos Marine Reserve, the fact that the eyes of the world have always been on Galapagos, especially since Darwin's visit and publication of The Origin of Species. I will also talk to you a little bit about Hermandad Marine Reserve, which is a recent reserve that we created just adjacent to Galapagos. So why is Galapagos special beyond the fact that it's permeated our psyche in terms of situating ourselves in the grand scheme of things? It's also unique in that it sits in the confluence of major ocean currents in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So it's about 1,000 kilometers off mainland Ecuador, belongs to Ecuador. The islands were discovered quite recently in 1535, so we don't have an indigenous population, but we're bathed by these major ocean currents. So we receive cool waters from Peru, warm waters from Panama, and they merge to form this South Equatorial current, which drives towards the west. And then from the west, we get this upwelling subsurface Cromwell current, which brings high productivity. So it's an area that, over the, 17 or so islands that we have a huge range of environmental conditions, from quite cool upwelling water to these warm, more Panamic waters. And that really allows for a lot of endemism and diversity in such a small area, and also a lot of productivity. So we get things like schools of hammerhead sharks and coral reefs next to penguins and fur seals. So it's kind of mishmash of biodiversity. Back in the 90s, Galapagos was experiencing quite large population growth, a combination of the advent of tourism and also influx from the coast of Ecuador, where a sea cucumber fishery had been operating for a couple of years, very quickly was wiped out, and then a lot of people migrated to the islands to take advantage of the sea cucumber there. Plus some other things too. There was a volcano eruption here and people lost their land. So there was this influx of population to the islands in the mid-90s. It also coincided with a huge increase in industrial fishing pressure. We had industrial longliners plowing up and down the coast. And so the local community at that point built this momentum towards creating a marine reserve. And initially this was opposed very strongly by the industrial fishing sector. They refused to participate in any of the negotiations and discussions. And in the end, the marine reserve was created after all, and it covers about 140,000 square kilometers. So at the time, it was the second largest in the world. And it is a multi-use marine reserve where local fishers are allowed to operate, but industrial fishing was excluded from the entire process. The way it was managed initially was through this. So all this was enshrined in a law called the Galapagos Special Law. And there's several key components of this law, which I think are pioneering even now. First of all, Galapagos is a province of Ecuador, and yet this special law limited migration to the Galapagos Islands for conservation reasons. So imagine wherever you're listening from, if you're listening from the US, imagine that the president said, you know what, no one can go live in Hawaii anymore because, for its conservation value, the entire state is out of bounds unless you are from there already. So this was a huge step forward for a country like Ecuador to be pioneering like that. And that helped to kind of limit this influx of migration. The other thing was the creation of the Galapagos Marine Reserve, and then finally also an organization of the entry fees that tourists paid at the time, $100, to make sure that the money remained in the islands in order to fund the control and management of the reserve. So it was set up really well. And then the final point is that there was a participatory management board set up. And this is an example of it. I love this example because everyone's smiling. The reality was not not as happy, but it was a very interesting system whereby the groups of users of the marine reserve would meet and discuss issues related to the management of the marine reserve. Many of those were related to lobster fishing or sea cucumber fishing, but also what sites are open for tourism, how do we develop a zonation. And so the direct users were the local fishing sector, the local tour operators, the Galapagos guides, and the conservation sector. And so those four users, plus the Galapagos National Park as the administrator, would meet and discuss. And the idea was that we would come to a consensus about what we would do. And if we were unable to come to a consensus, then that was elevated to a ministerial board that would make take a majority vote. And that ministerial board also included some of these users, including the local fishing and the tourism sector. So it was set up very much as a forum where, at the very least, if you couldn't agree, at least everyone knew where everyone stood. I appeared on the scene in 2002, so a very new marine reserve, and my job was to provide the scientific support to allow us to manage the fisheries in a sustainable fashion. So I was immediately thrown into sea cucumber fishery, spiny lobster fishery, and on the top right here we have a semi-endemic slipper lobster. And so we were out in the field. It was a fantastic job. You know, I could be diving one evening, catching lobsters, the next morning processing the data, and in the afternoon I'm talking to a minister. So as a young biologist, it was a fascinating job. It was also very frustrating because fisheries management was always very difficult in Galapagos, because most of these fisheries are for export. And once you have an external market, those forces tend to overwhelm conservation efforts. And so when we talk about the success of a marine reserve, I think the success can cover many different issues. And I think if we look at these coastal fisheries, there's not a single one that we've managed to keep sustainable over the years, but there are some success stories in there. Now, unfortunately, President Correa in 2015 did away with the participatory process. What's interesting, though, and I would say this is a success, is that the very people that used to boycott the process sometimes in complaint are now begging for that process to be reestablished. And so I think anytime we have these participatory processes, we didn't know what we were doing. We had 19-hour meetings with no air conditioning and no food. But I think instead of doing away with it, we needed to really invest in, okay, how do we build our consensus process outside those meetings? So those meetings are almost like, you know, you stand up, you say your bit, you rubber stamp it, and you either agree or disagree. So there's a big push now to reestablish that figure, and it does exist in the new version of the Galapagos law. To switch gears a little bit into Hermandad, my own work kind of in about 2006 diverged towards studying sharks, because at the time there was a push to allow longlining inside the marine reserve, and the marine reserve is a shark sanctuary. And we quickly realized through our studies that Galapagos, you know, up until then, everything, all the research in Galapagos had been Galapagos inwards. Are we protecting endemic species? Can we keep out invasive species? What are our coastal resources like? And for the first time, we started asking, well, hang on a minute. What is the role of Galapagos looking outwards? How is Galapagos protecting highly migratory species? And almost immediately, we found that sharks were migrating towards Cocos. And then in about 2017, again, another grassroots movement from inside Galapagos, really pushing towards the current size and shape of the marine reserve is not enough to protect the species we want to protect. And so we went through this huge process with a grassroots group in Galapagos called Más Galapagos, More Galapagos, on the one hand, and the industrial fishing sector on the other hand, based in mainland Ecuador, but who fish around Galapagos. And as scientists, we were in the middle, developing scenarios and communicating with all sides and proposing different things. And eventually this led to the creation of Hermandad. Hermandad means sisterhood or brotherhood in Spanish. And I like to think it has a double meaning here. The first meaning is because it's the first time that I know of, at least in this region, that even though the process was highly contentious at times, this map that you're seeing now is actually a consensus between the fishing side of the argument and the conservation side of the argument. So sisterhood or brotherhood, we did actually come together. And secondly, as you can see, it's kind of halfway towards Cocos Island, again, sisterhood reaching out towards Costa Rica and saying, look, we're going to protect our highly migratory protected species. You know, our brothers and sisters in Costa Rica, please do the same. So that's where we are right now. Hermandad is a real success. Just to end up on this short note on Hermandad, because it came, it was built with consensus, and it came with an associated debt swap for nature that allows us to fund the control and enforcement of Hermandad in perpetuity while reducing Ecuador's national debt, and at the same time provides a fund of several $1 million that goes directly into the pockets of the community in Galapagos. We've already, I think, dispersed this year $2 million to local marine education initiatives and local sustainable fishing initiatives. And this is an in perpetuity resource. So the fact that we've got this, it's being implemented immediately and respected before we even had the management plan. It was done in consensus and has funding in perpetuity is really, really exciting. This is the model that we want to put forward in the future. And my last slide is kind of where do we see hope, and how have we, sorry, my second last slide is where, you know, where do we find the hope, and how do we, you know, cross this adversity? A lot of it has to do with engagement. This is a photo, Sylvia Earle just turned 90 last weekend, but Manolo and I, Manolo's the other person in this photo, we're the co-Hope Spot champions for Galapagos. Manolo's a fisherman, second or even third generation fisherman in Galapagos, and some of the things that he is doing more than anyone else inspire hope for me, because he understood very early on that through responsible fishing and traceability, he can market a product and command a better price because people want to consume responsibly caught goods. And so we're working very much with him. And the idea is that once people see how well it's going for him, it can have a snowball effect. And so really at the moment in Galapagos, the challenge is there are two visions that are racing forward. Historically, the vision of Galapagos has been how much can we exploit, how quickly can we exploit it, and that goes back to the whaling days right up until the present. But what we're trying to do is change that vision. So to paraphrase Kennedy, you know, ask not how Galapagos can satisfy your wants, ask how you can satisfy Galapagos needs. So we have a fishing sector with overexploited resources, but instead of looking for more resources for them to exploit, let's think back to a national vision about reducing our carbon footprint, about promoting circular economies, about a conservation-based economy, and about food security. And one of the things that we're really excited, we're just piloting right now, is how you go from, you know, shark research to school lunches. Well, imagine we can have a process locally whereby every school in Galapagos, every school child in Galapagos would have 1 or 2 free fish-based healthy school dinners a week, caught by the local fishermen using responsible fishing gear and funded through the Galapagos Life Fund, which came by creating a marine reserve just outside Galapagos. So there you've got direct benefit of conservation, reducing your carbon footprint, and feeding your children and turning your fishermen to heroes at the same time, reducing the temptation to go into illegal fishing. So it's these kinds of ideas that we're working on at the moment. So very exciting time. I don't know overall how successful or not we are. It's often a matter of opinion, but I think I'll leave it there because my 7 minutes are probably more than up. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex. That was great. And I really look forward to the conversation and talking more about that broader vision of sustainability. So now we're going to hear from Naya Lewis. Naya, please go ahead.
Kakahiyakakako. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lauren. Let me get I'll share my screen here. Let's see. Okay. I have a few slides in there basically so you guys don't have to just think of me as a talking head. So again, like I said, my name is Naya, and I'm honored to join you guys today from Hawaii to contribute to the conversation about the durability and resilience of MPAs. But in my case, I'm going to speak specifically about large-scale MPAs. And I'm speaking today in my role as Director of Big Ocean, a network of the world's largest scale marine managed areas, and as a former member of the management team for Papahānaumokuākea. So over the last 2 decades, I've had the privilege of working alongside Native Hawaiian community members, leaders, cultural practitioners, scientists, policymakers, conservation professionals, and perhaps most importantly, from a big ocean perspective, the managers who are tasked with caring for vast ocean spaces. And many of the examples I will draw from today are rooted in my time with Papahanaumokuakea, which continues to shape the work that I do, my experiences with the monument, with that team, and since then have affirmed what I believe to be the core truth, that our work has never been solely about conservation. It has always been and must continue to be about restoring a reciprocal relationship between people and place, even for these vast ocean areas that in many cases people think are unpopulated. But from a cultural perspective, we see these places as populated. They may not be peopled, but they are populated. And for Papahanaumokuakea, they are populated, right, with our ancestors and our legacy with which we follow. In 2010, I helped to create Big Ocean along with the concept founder, Aulani Wilhelm, and the other managers and practitioners who came to the table looking for community. And at that time, there were only 6 large-scale MPAs globally, which meant that finding peers who understood the challenges of daily operations were few and far between. And today, the number of LSMPAs has grown of large-scale MPAs has grown 7-fold to around 40 or 44 sites, depending upon how you count and what you consider as a large-scale site. But the total number of LSMPAs has tripled. It's funny, I pulled this earlier in 2024 and I looked again earlier today and it was more in the 16,000. So I'm not sure what's happening, but the bottom line is there are many MPAs, right? It has just grown exponentially. And so Big Ocean is evolving as well, but we remain steadfast to our mission to improve global marine stewardship at scale through shared practice, mutual support, and leadership that is adaptive and inclusive. So just speaking broadly, right, on some of the challenges that we see at scale, LSMPAs have had to prove themselves from the very beginning. When you protect large swaths of ocean, you inevitably run into powerful interests, broadly from the commercial fishing sector, and more recently, though, from deep sea mining. Papahanaumokuakea, along with many of its peers, have faced sustained pressure to open access or scale back protections. These confrontations aren't just about ocean use, they're about governance and about who has the authority to decide and how power is shared and withheld. Just in the slide, these were the concerns of managers have really built over time. So we would, survey our members, and between 2010 and 2014, you can see the priorities that would be at the top all of the time. And since then, I would say priorities, right, have grown. And they have been added too. So each individual site might select a different mix of these, but you can definitely see how, especially politics has begun to weave its way into daily challenges. So like I was saying, the political of conservation, the politics of conservation are not stable. Changes in administration, funding priorities, and national and geopolitical factors can drastically shift the landscape for managers. And often managers, right, the people who actually implement protection are overlooked in broader narratives. We are increasingly aware that large-scale MPAs are vulnerable to political tides that extend far beyond their boundaries. And for many of us in Big Ocean, geopolitical awareness is no longer optional. It's a core competency, a core management competency. If we want these areas to endure, we must invest in diplomacy as much as data, and in political fluency as much as policy compliance. The ocean has always connected us, and it's time that we ensure our governance does the same. And in fact, just on a personal note, if I had funding to do one thing at every site, it would probably be to provide them with a dedicated political strategist, someone who actually can help them navigate power dynamics, cultivate critical relationships, and actually build stronger coalitions. Resilience is also a huge factor, but what does that mean? Resilience is built on more than just ecological strength. It's about people, systems, and leadership. I think everyone here knows, right? It's cliche, but nature doesn't need to be managed, right? People need to be managed. And so sites endure when there are durable partnerships, because this isn't just about managing the public and considering them as an audience, right? It's the management teams themselves. The team itself needs to be resilient. So sites endure when there are durable partnerships, clear governance frameworks, and when people are supported, especially those in positions requiring cultural fluency and interpersonal intelligence. Papahanaumokuakea's success is not the result of a single policy or funding stream. It's the result of years of relationship building, learning, and cultural grounding. It's not a place of ownership, but of shared responsibility. And for sure, the Native Hawaiian community has been pivotal in that understanding. Our ability to uplift and care for Papahanaumokuakea happens when the web of intergenerational caretakers includes Hawaiians from diverse sectors, those working inside government, academia, and community organizations alike. But this requires planning, right? Succession, and not just for directors, not for those just at the top, but for those with a deep and specialized knowledge of the place. This is vital. We must invest now in the quality of work that will be done 10 or 20 years from now. And that includes creating space for people who did not come up through traditional conservation paths, but bring different needs and strengths. And I would put myself squarely in that box. And even though I'm ending with this, right, there is the indigenous experience, which is not a success, which is not a footnote to the success of large-scale marine protected areas. It is central. The Pacific is the birthplace of large-scale MPAs, and the world's largest ocean continues to be the home of the majority of these types of sites. So the connections to indigenous peoples and communities is robust and direct. Sorry, I hope you guys can't hear that truck outside. I can. It's very loud. The establishment and care of Papahanaumokuakea required trailblazing new approaches, not just applying indigenous knowledge to Western management, but questioning and reforming the standards of best practice of national offices and departments and ministries, as well as international institutions and agencies. And as one example, when Papahanaumokuakea went for its World Heritage Site, its nomination, it had to push back in terms of they wanted them to write both a nature and culture application separately. And they said, but from an indigenous worldview, like that's not how we see the world. And so I think it's being innovative in ways like that. And some of the most catalytic individuals on the staff at Papahanaumokuakea led with indigenous perspectives and values so beautifully that their way of being changed what conservation meant in that space. They brought cultural grounding, political strategy, and a different way of actually asking questions. And so ultimately, indigenous worldviews shift our lens from extraction to responsibility, from control to care, from ownership to kinship. And when that worldview leads or stands equally besides Western science, you get a deeper, more resilient, and more just forms of protection, which are requisite to durability and resilience. So thank you for having me. I'm privileged to be here.
Thank you so much, Naya. And that's such a great encapsulation of how we can learn from Indigenous perspectives and knowledge. So really look forward to hearing more in the longer conversation. So I'm going to turn now to Alan White, who's spent decades in Southeast Asia on coastal and MPA issues. So look forward to hearing from you, Alan.
Hello, everyone, and I'll share my slides here. Is it shared? No.
Not yet.
You see it now? Share. There.
Okay, we can see it now. But
Okay, sorry. Okay.
if you can put it in presentation mode, Alan. There you go.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Well, hello again. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for asking me to join this very interesting seminar. I'm happy to be able to share some of our lessons learned and a few tipping points from work in the Philippines over a number of years. I first went there in 1978 as a Peace Corps volunteer and have sort of been working on and off there ever since. I now work with a foundation based in Cebu City called the Coastal Conservation Education Foundation, which was founded in 1998. And we continue to do a lot of work on MPAs and marine conservation in the country through our foundation. So I'll just start with a little timeline and sort of context for what's happened in the Philippines. When I first went there in 1978, there was only one small community-based local government MPA called on Sumilon Island. And Sumilon Island was very important in the overall progression of MPAs in the Philippines because a lot of good research was done there on the impact of closing a reef to fishing, showing that what would happen when you closed a reef, the fish would grow to mature sizes, they would reproduce, they would spill over, and there would be benefits to the fishing community. And it was actually a large experiment that was done through Silliman University and people like Dr. Alcala and some of the scientists that were working in the southern Philippines at that time. And then followed from Sumilon Island, there was another small island that took interest in this and set up a similar small protected area on Apo Island. And it was really the first true community-based MPA, which was managed through the community and done with sort of local people fully involved and endorsing the progression of the MPA. But of course, in the 1970s and 80s in the Philippines, a driving force for setting up protected areas was a lot of destructive fishing, overfishing. There were many forces that were going against the protection of habitats in the country, and basically there was significant decline in fish biomass and in the condition of reefs and mangroves and other critical habitats in the near shore. But one of the key events at the national policy level, which has brought the potential for expanding protection locally, was the 1991 local government code, which was passed in the Philippines to allow full jurisdiction for coastal municipalities and cities to 15 kilometers offshore, which meant that they had full jurisdiction and control over their critical habitats and the management of their marine resources in their local jurisdictions. And then in 1998, a large USAID-funded project working with the national government, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the Bureau of Fisheries in the Philippines, hosted a large seminar in Manila through the League of Municipalities of the Philippines, which brought all the coastal mayors, all 830 coastal mayors to the capital city, and spent 2 days talking about coastal resource management and the value of MPAs in their jurisdictions. And the meeting was also hosted by the president of the country, Fidel Ramos, who was a big proponent of marine conservation at that time. And the mayors bought into this. And after that, there was a large expansion of technical assistance being asked by the local governments to support their work in marine conservation. The country being coastal and having a very long coastline, being very dependent on resources, meant that they saw the value in moving forward with this. Now, one of the big lessons in the Philippines over the years is that people at the local level need to perceive initially that they will receive benefits from a protected area, and within a reasonable amount of time, they need to actually see tangible benefits. So with this, we see that MPAs are really created for fisheries management, a rationale. They need to sustain food and nutrition in some sense. And mostly they need to generate some kind of economic benefit or income for people so that will continue to incentivize their protection and their involvement in conserving these areas. And this is one reason why the MPAs in the Philippines have scaled up to a large number. Now, the Apo Island example that I mentioned started in 1984, and this has sort of been a model for what's happened across the country. Now there are more than 2,000 MPAs in the Philippines that are under municipal and city government regime. There's about 36 nationally managed MPAs, which include places like the Tubataha Reefs in the Sulu Sea, which is quite a well-known, large, well-managed site. but most of the MPAs in the Philippines, and that's more than 2,000, are under the local government. And within these, most of them are basically no fishing zones. They're set up in a manner where they do not allow fishing in a small portion of an island reef or a shoreline reef, and they are strictly protected by communities or local government units, which provide most of the support and the input for enforcement of the areas. And of course, over time, the fishery benefits have accrued to communities, but in addition to that, they've attracted tourism, scuba diving tourists, snorkeling tourists, and people that have brought money and economic benefits to people in the local areas. So this has really helped expand the network of MPAs. Now, I show this slide, which we've all seen many times, but one of the key factors that convinced communities to protect their local reefs was that when they saw that fish could grow to their mature size and start reproducing at a more effective and efficient manner, they saw the benefits. And when they saw this in reality, they started calling their areas fish banks or sanctuarios. And they then began to see the value in having these so-called fish banks. And that was a key factor in sort of pushing the whole program forward at a national scale as the word started to spread among the local government units and various communities that shared these experiences. Another major input for supporting the local sort of involvement was being able to measure economic benefits to the sites. There were a number of economic sort of cost benefit type studies done around the country in some of the key sites, showing the total the revenues, the net benefits from fisheries, from tourism, from other economic inputs that were being affecting the local sites. And this had a major role in sort of convincing government officials, both at the local and the national level, that these were valuable tools, not only in terms of marine conservation, but in terms of benefiting the local economy. Being a country which is relatively, the local economy is not that strong, and there's quite a bit of poverty in many of the coastal areas. And then some of the other sort of so-called tipping points in moving the process forward to scale it up at the national level was in the late 1990s, there was a move to set up what's called the Coral Reef Monitoring for Management System. And this was published in a book, I think in 1998, which had a major effect on allowing local units, local government units, non-government organizations, local universities to have a systematic way of monitoring their coral reef, both for the coral condition, the substrate, the benthic condition, the fish biomass, and looking at fisheries production that was coming out of their area. And this sort of standardized information and allowed the process to be shared at a much wider scale than if it was only done by a few more educated marine scientists in selected sites. And then the other sort of key aspect in monitoring the condition of MPAs in the Philippines has been the development of a governance monitoring framework called the MPA MEET, or the Marine Protected Area Management Effectiveness Assessment Tool. Now, this was first developed in the early around 2005. It was adopted nationally in 2010 by the national government. It's been modified for some of the national MPAs, but it's still basically used for all of the local MPAs. And the key thing here is that it's been more of a learning tool, so that the local officials, the local participants, managers have a way of measuring how well they're doing in terms of setting up a well-managed small marine protected area. This has played a key role in sort of moving the whole process forward and improving the quality of governance in the various sites. Now, over the years, we've collected a tremendous amount of data on a number of sites. And now we have a database. I think we have database for more than 300 MPAs, but we've selected out 122 MPAs to look at the impact of the protected area on the reef and the fish biomass in these sites. And we've seen that across the board, starting in the early 1980s, we have basically a stable marine environment for those small MPAs which are protecting the reef. And there's been a slight increase in biomass of fish in these areas. And we're working on a sort of a major study right now, which will be published hopefully by the end of this year, early next year, to show all of this data and how it's been sort of manifested for looking at the condition of the reef in these areas across the country. And it's probably one of the longest term data sets for looking at the condition of reefs. And It's actually somewhat of a contrast to the overall decline in reefs in the country, which are those which are not under some level or a condition of protection and management. So finally, a few sort of takeaways from what we've learned in the Philippines. As mentioned, destructive and overfishing were driving forces in the early years of the work. MPAs, of course, as they've gotten better, have attracted poachers in an overfished environment, which has required improved community level enforcement and commitment to sort of step up to manage the need of protecting the sites. The capacity of the local government units has been quite limited over the years, and this has provided an incentive for a good amount of technical support to build up that capacity at the local government level. As mentioned, there's more than 800 coastal municipalities. So the capacity at that level is quite variable across the board in the country. There's also been a sort of a growing systematic illegal fishing network in different parts of the country. The fishermen are quite sophisticated in that they often move in groups and go to areas which are not being well protected. So this has stimulated the need for governance and enforcement networks where more than one local government unit bands together with its neighbors and sets out sort of patrolling for protecting the area which may be affected by illegal fishing. There's, of course, increasing climate events in the Philippines. Philippines is frequented by something like 20 or more typhoons per year, which affects the reefs on the windward side of the islands or the shorelines. So people are having to deal with restoration of reefs from storm wave damage and, of course, bleaching. And because of the sort of the large nature of the country and the sort of disbursement of all these management efforts, fragmentation has pointed to the need for more integration and management. So the success factors that we've sort of highlighted and are very important. The need for monitoring and feedback loops has been key in the country. There's been a higher level of awareness generated by having good information and feedback to what the condition is and what are the problems, what are the solutions. There's also a national best managed MPA award system, which has been developed under the national government. Every year they give an award to several of the best managed MPAs. It's a cash award, and it also attracts a lot of media attention. So, of course, many of the local communities are really keen to be part of that and win the award. One thing we've seen in the Philippines, which is key for success overall, is the high level of participation of all the stakeholders, from the very local community fishermen level to the local barangay units, the municipal councils, and to some extent the national agencies that have been supported in the background. There's also a growing number of supportive NGOs in the Philippines. Our own NGO works more in the southern Philippines, but there's a good number that we work at, through a network of NGOs. Another key factor for success has been the devolution to the local governments, giving them jurisdiction and also giving them budget. The national government of the Philippines allocates a certain budget for environment and marine conservation to all of the local governments, which has been key for allowing them to have some financial ability to set up their protected areas and do some patrolling. And then finally, and not least by any means, is the level of education. I'd say in the Philippines, the awareness about marine conservation is quite high. There's a lot of attention in the media, newspapers, and the schools have provided some time for focusing on natural resource management and conservation in their educational program, which has been quite important. And there's also a growing sort of recreation, diving and swimming or snorkeling industry in the Philippines, which many Filipinos take part in. So it's provided an incentive for protection of their coastal areas. So with that, I'll sign off and look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was great. I love the distillation at the end. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kerry from the South African National Biodiversity Institute.
Hi, everyone. Is that working?
Yeah, we just need it in presentation mode.
Should be there now.
Yep, perfect.
Thanks. As all of the previous speakers have touched on, marine protected areas are designed, implemented, managed and shepherded through adversity in teams. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank the many partners and scientists and practitioners and managers and knowledge holders, rights holders, and stakeholders that I've worked with over the last 19 years. It's really a pleasure to share some of South Africa's story. My own experience centers in the design of a network of new protected areas that was implemented in 2019. And I started this work in 2006 when South Africa had 22 coastal marine protected areas, and including the first one established in 1964, very much in the apartheid era, and the second one named after the architect of apartheid. And really, South Africa is a mining economy. The center of the country the country is centered, and the governance of the country in the center of the country, which is unusual, not in the coastal area. I'm based in Cape Town, but one of the important things to understand in this framework is the powerful interests that several speakers have also touched on: mining, petroleum, commercial fisheries, but also the many injustices and exclusions of our coastal marine protected area network. And I was really sad the first time I started doing community interviews to find that the top 3 words associated with marine protected areas in South Africa were hate, injustice, and exclusion. So I'm painting a very tough picture for the work that we did over, it was a 13-year process to design a network of protected areas that was more representative. And it was built on work that was started when I was 4 years old. Professor George Branch is one of the people that was involved in trying to establish the Namaqualand MPA in the northeast. So on the Atlantic side, we have the Atlantic, the Indian, and the Southern Ocean, all part of South Africa's territory. But that protected area was blocked, and it first actually only made it to Gazette in 2004. And it was the first protected area that wasn't proclaimed despite making it to Gazette. And I really studied the problems and challenges there in designing the process to expand at a later stage. So I will not speak much about the Pekisa Marine Protected Area establishment, but it's what Radeloff would call a hot moment in conservation, and speaks to my first lesson, which is about keep getting ready in the design of protected areas, that keep making the case. And yeah, there were a couple of moments where things moved forward and lessons around enabling factors, but there were also some chilling moments. I'm not going to take you through South Africa's whole process, but I will say that it was grounded in relationship building and stakeholder engagement. We made mistakes, and in particular, we didn't engage much with coastal communities and small-scale fishers, focused more on the 22 oil and gas companies, the diamond mining, the offshore element. And so there were a lot of lessons in this process, but these areas were declared in 2019. We had to go back and address failures in our participatory process in one of these marine protected areas. So in something that my social scientist colleague that really helped us navigate this calls retrospective participation. And it's something I think we still need to do a lot of work in South Africa, going back to those people who were excluded and reworking through those issues in a process, and sometimes redesign and redress. Another story in South Africa was the Tsitsikamma Marine Protected Area, which was established in 1964, and that was rezoned and opened 20% of it to fishing. Many scientists said that years of protection would be undone in a few weeks, but that's not quite what happened. So I think there were lessons there. One of my most difficult moments in this protection journey was when we inserted this work into an ocean economy initiative, and we realized we couldn't communicate effectively about marine protected areas. And so I think that was one of the most difficult challenges, was getting through and in alignment with an oceans economy. And there are lessons there. But I think one of the most important things that several of you, all of you actually touched on, is the need for relationship building in this kind of work, for both establishing and ensuring the persistence of marine protected areas. You really need diverse relationships and trust. And this is really critical in problem solving. We know that mature relationships are needed. So, I think this is something that we really have learned to keep fostering a diversity of partnerships, and those relationships need to span multiple scales. I now also want a political strategist in my team. Thank you, Naya, for that tip. We haven't had that, but I know the importance of working on the ground, from on the ground all the way to the political level, but importantly also around disciplines. And I think a sound social process and meaningful participation has really been critical in getting this work to go forward. And without social scientists and people working closely with fishers and really teams, and that participation, you can't get any of this right, in my view. Critical for us was the fine scale sharing of priorities. I have a story around the Namakwaland Marine Protected Area where we had all our spatial planning outputs, but actually when the head of a major international oil company brought what he called his heaven and earth map, and he said, right, the red areas are the areas we're going to move heaven and earth to stop you, but the green areas is where you can go ahead. And that was a difficult moment, but I think that actual sharing of priorities helped us to reconfigure and come up with something that allowed the critical features to be protected without blocking South Africa's ocean economy. And I think that, as I've moved forward, it's really having the social process skills and the community of practice to help with participation and community and inclusive problem solving. And we heard about Indigenous leadership. In the bottom picture here is a young scientist that I work with who's an Indigenous leader in ocean conservation. And he's really bringing many of the practices Naya referred to, which are transforming our relationships, and I think are going to be critical for that process we still need to do to resolve existing injustices in South Africa's protected area network, but also to bring a more diverse view in establishing protection and tangible and intangible benefits from marine protected areas. I think facilitation has really been helpful. I think this is something everyone recognizes these days. And then touching on the planning and implementation work, that participation is the central element. And we still have a lot of work to do. I think South Africa still kind of sits between informing and consulting, and we need to shift to empower local knowledge holders and rights holders to champion this work. I think it's really important to keep making the case for marine protected areas. I think we really learnt that tough day in the cabinet and in the ocean economy, the importance of effective communication. And it's not just about communication, it's about designing for tangible benefits. We heard today about durable partnerships, and I think that's absolutely critical. But also caring communication. You can have the kind of marine protected area communication that's insensitive in South Africa to some of the injustices. And that can be a barrier for further protected area establishment or even effective management. And then for us, one of the critical things, and I've really seen this in action, and even I've been able to experience the Papahanaumokoa Marine Protected Area through live streaming. So I think it's really important, as my mother taught me, you need to roll back the blue blanket if you want people to understand what you understand about the ocean because of the privileges of the experiences I've had. So we need to share that, and sharing that's also been transformative in reaching decision makers and working with people. So I think that's an important. So just in summing up, I just wanted to center relationships and trust. Trust building is critical for durable marine protected areas. The value of social science and social process facilitators, artists, diverse knowledge forms, Indigenous people, Indigenous leadership in these processes. the importance of multi-generational efforts, taking people with you. We heard about succession planning. I think that's really critical. And then effective participation, communication and integration. You know, I think one of the biggest setbacks I saw in South Africa's story was when we fractured our governance of the ocean and ocean conservation with fisheries. And that really set us back because marine protected areas were like children in a bitter divorce, fisheries there, environment there. And I think, yeah, we're back in one department now, but it takes a long time to overcome that. So integration is key. And then designing and co-designing actually and managing for diverse benefits, I think is important. And then keep on learning, keep on building your relationships and keep on improving. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kerry. Thank all of you. Those were wonderful presentations, and you've done such a great job of teeing up some of the really important characteristics of what it takes to have durable MPAs that can persevere despite challenges. And in particular, Kerry and Alan, I think you really almost made us a list, which is fantastic. But I do want to start there because I think it's a great foundation for the rest of the conversation, and just invite you all to reflect on what's different about designing for perseverance compared to perhaps maybe the standard way or the past way of thinking about MPA design and management, and really just open the floor, whoever wants to jump in.
I guess, I mean, I'll jump in terms of, large scale. What's interesting is, some sites are out to the EEZ, so you're not really designing. It's the entire area. So you're really talking about, whole domain management. And sites now too, there also is a trend to expand sites. So even if they don't start out small. So, in the large scale space, I just think, establishing legislation, the mechanisms that you're using are a core part of thinking about that design, just because it's a consideration of, right, when political administrations switch, have you picked a durable mechanism? Can things be rolled back easily or not? And then, of course, whenever you're talking things that are that scale, you have to have best practice engagement of the public, et cetera. I just think, long-term support is so critical for these sites that I love hearing retrospective engagement, and yet there could be an instance where there's so much damage that has been caused in the large scale sites that it might be challenging to do that. So you have to go in with the long term in mind, just like intergenerational knowledge. Maybe it's not something that you can have happen. So I think that that's critical in large scale.
Yeah, thank you, Naya.
I think from my side, it's really the co-design and the participation from the outset that wasn't around. And that's not advice that I got at the beginning of my career. And that's what allows you to also design for a much broader diversity of benefits, right? Because you can involve more people. So I think that participatory and co-design element is a key one.
Just to build on that, I think in a large scale space, it's co-design, but I guess even collaboration and buy-in from different levels of agencies. We know what we're finding now, with Papahanaumoku. Okay, I'm not one of the managers now, so I do not speak for the site, but there is a difference between some of the regulations of the monument when it was first established and then this expansion area, and those begin to conflict. So I think it's really thinking through, not just at that management level, but really at that higher, the political and legal mechanisms that you're talking about are really critical.
Yeah, and back to the Apple Island example, in the beginning years when the scientists were doing research and sort of surveys there to establish a protected area, there was a suggestion for taking part of the reef, which was popular where the fishermen went. So there was a lot of discussion with the community about, where would be the best site for a no fishing zone. Now, the scientists had one idea and the fishermen had another. But in the end, the compromise was to go with what the fishermen preferred, because that really gained the buy-in of the community, and the community then endorsed it and has actually protected that site ever since 1984. But if it had moved into the fishing area, which was popular for the local community, it probably would not have worked out that way. So compromise and sort of the co-design with the community, and then the local government and even the national officials sort of bought into that too.
Yeah. No, that's a great start. And I, you mentioned fishing and Kerry, I love your description of not including MPAs and fisheries in the same agency is making the MPAs the child of a bitter divorce. I think many of us who've worked on MPAs have felt like that. But I do think there's a question from a participant who said, we know that MPAs often face pushback from nearby small-scale fishing communities due to factors such as limited consultation and low buy-in and the loss of access to fishing grounds. In cases where MPAs are well managed and can show benefits like spillover, what do you all think about the development of effective locally managed marine areas, or LMMAs, which is a sort of complementary concept to MPAs, adjacent to MPA boundaries as a way to build community support? So just interested in your comments about this tool or others that might be used to help address community concerns about fishing.
Well, I mean, I'd like to jump in there about this isn't necessarily from Galapagos, because the whole of Galapagos is an MPA, and we do have a zonation there. Fortunately, it's a zonation that's fairly contentious, and it wasn't helped by an internal and external NGO kind of jumping the whole system to get a big sanctuary created while people were negotiating on the other side. So I think, first of all, everyone needs to operate transparently. But on mainland Ecuador, especially the NGOs, because you only need to slip up once to lose credibility. But on mainland Ecuador, what was interesting, I'd like to talk about the example of Cabuyal. Puerto Cabuyal is a small community in about middle height of Ecuador. Now, what happened there was that the community requested the creation of an MPA that was multi-use, that they can manage. And the reason being is that Ecuadorian fishing law excludes industrial fishing from the first 8 miles. The problem is that it's not enforced. And so here you had a win-win situation where if you have a local community that depends on fishing for subsistence, this isn't the commercial artisan, this is subsistence fishing, and they were finding that their areas being encroached by the industry. By making it an MPA, that encroachment falls under the environmental penal law rather than just a fisheries infraction. And so on the face of it, saying, well, why are you doing this? Industrial fishing is already banned from there, but it actually it's a much larger deterrent, and it allows to provide resources for patrolling and builds empowerment. So in that sense, in Ecuador, we found, at least with Cabuyal, and I know there's an initiative right now to kind of replicate that this locally designed and managed MPAs with fishing communities can be a very, very good tool.
Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts? Alan, I'm curious what your thoughts are, given all the experience you've had with fishing issues in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, well, certainly one of the driving forces in the beginning was that there was a lot of overfishing in the Philippines, and communities realized that their fish catch had declined, their reefs were degraded, the fish they were catching were very small. I mean, it was quite obvious that the data was pointing in the direction that things were just going to collapse. So when communities saw an opportunity to actually bring some of that back to life, and they saw the tangible results within actually 1 or 2 years in some cases, because the reefs are in such bad shape that when they protected them, they saw an immediate improvement. They saw that was a great way to go. But then the word started to spread. So when you're working in one small community in the southern Philippines, you wonder how it's going to spread nationally, but it did. Ultimately, it went to all over the country, because both through word of mouth, through media, and then, as I mentioned, there were national sort of conventions that brought all this forward to some of the policymakers so they could see the benefits, and then it sort of caught on. So now every community wants to have a no fishing zone in their territorial waters. I mean, they see that as sort of a bank of preserving what they need. And so it's really gone to scale without a lot of input from the outside, without a lot of foreign assistance, actually.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And I think that idea of MPAs as fish banks is such a great description of sort of community buy-in to the concept.
Right.
And so related to the fishing issue, we also had another question from one of our participants, particularly directed to you, Alex, that asks, how are you thinking in addressing the issue of illegal industrial scale fishing from Chinese fleets entering the Galapagos Marine Reserve? And this person had just returned from working in diving in Galapagos and was saying that a lot of the locals expressed concern about this. So just interested in any reflections you have about how to address that when it's often out of people's immediate control.
Yeah, but the reality is that the press here sometimes are a little misleading with the way they portray this, because actually what the Chinese fleet has done, especially the squid fleet that they migrate up along the coast of South America and then out past Galapagos. When the news is that they're in Galapagos, what they actually mean is that they're bordering the waters of the Ecuadorian EEZ, not necessarily inside the marine reserve. And so we've got 40 nautical miles of marine reserve around the islands, and then another 160 nautical miles until we get to international waters. So the Chinese fleet, they're not so you've got several layers of threats, if you like. I mean, for me, the most immediate one is actually, how can we manage our local fisheries sustainably and reduce illegal long-lining fishing by the local fleet? Then you've got outside Galapagos, you've got the national long-line fleet and the national purse seine fleet. And then we have issues like, the migratory species that move out. And then you've got the Chinese fleet. So, I mean, I think one thing that Ecuador did a few years ago when there was a big noise about this is through diplomatic channels, and we found that the fleet would just very obviously keep their distance for a little bit as they moved around. So I think there's different levels of engagement, and I think at this point with the high seas fleet that are actually in the high seas, not in the Galapagos Marine Reserve, if they are, then that's illegal, and they need and then they're subject to Ecuadorian law. And in fact, one of them was in 2017. This was the Fuyuan Yang. It was a reefer vessel. It was caught in Galapagos with 350 tons of tuna and about 8,000 sharks on board and one hook. It was a reefer vessel, so they'd got fish from other vessels outside, and so they were actually detained and processed for possession. As soon as they entered the marine reserve, they were breaking the law because they had sharks in possession, and the boat was taken off them, and they all had prison sentence. They went to jail. The captain was in jail for 5 years, and that really stimulated this local outcry. I mean, there were marches in the streets to protect sharks, and that stimulated the eventual creation of the Hermandad Reserve. Like, clearly this is not enough. These species are moving out. They're being vulnerable. But that vessel in particular, it wasn't fishing inside the reserve, but it broke the law immediately that it entered.
Right.
Yeah,
very interesting. Go ahead.
The Philippines is also dealing with Chinese incursion. But there is a success story. A number of years ago, the Chinese came to Tubataha Reefs in the Sulu Sea. They came in with a few boats and were collecting sea turtles and catching fish and whatnot. But they were arrested. They were all put in jail in Puerto Princesa City in Palawan Island. And they were held there for 6 months until the governor said, well, we can't afford to keep you in prison anymore. But they went back to China without their boats. And they haven't come back to Tubataha Reef since then. So.
If I just want to build on this idea of the diplomatic channels, and I feel sometimes, and I say this, lovingly to everyone who's dedicated to conservation, but like, conservation doesn't need to lead, like, it is not most of the issues. I mean, conservation is here to address and resolve issues of human behavior and other things that are happening. And some of the things that we're talking about are really diplomatic issues or socioeconomic issues or other kinds of issues that conservation needs to be a clear ingredient in. But I think sometimes even the fact that it's framed as there's this conservation issue versus really coming at it as this is a, you know, a social political issue and really raising it to that level and having buy-in by the community. It's almost like extending the event horizon of how long it takes, because you end up having conversations in conservation issues quarters and having to move out, and then you finally get right to the political space. Why not start there, you know? And that's where I think this idea of like cross-sector engagement, really, we really need to expand our imaginations to reach the scale of the issues that we're talking about, right? And that it's conservation is vital and important, but it does not always need to be the tip of the spear, you know, because in the end, in some of these, right, it doesn't end up being the tip of the spear. It then moves back. So why not just start right there?
Right. Yeah, to build on that too, I mean, the Galapagos is now part of the drugs trade route. And so again, it's in national interest to have eyes in the water there. Our local fishermen are very vulnerable to offers that cannot be refused to transport fuel and things like that. So, and also there's the question of national sovereignty in terms of invasion of vessels from other countries. So, you know, if you put all those together, then you have a pretty powerful incentive to kind of manage and protect your area. And we found that worked very well with Hermandad. And to go back to an earlier comment about, you know, the multi-agency side of things that kind of helps to build resilience, Hermandad is managed as a multi-agency marine reserve. So the Navy, the Fisheries Agency, and the Environment Agency are all involved, and Chancellorship as well, I believe, are all involved in the management of the reserve.
So that's great. And we did talk about sort of illegal fishing, but I'm also curious about any reflections you have on just large-scale industrial fishing and how MPAs have been able to work with, negotiate with those interests, and yet still maintain, you know, achieving their goals despite perhaps some opposition from that sector. So any comments on that? Or you know, experiences that you've had? Yeah, Kerry.
Yeah, I can comment on that. In South Africa, one of the enabling factors for offshore protection was eco-certification of our large, our Hake demersal trawl fishery. So the eco-certification program raised condition for seabed habitat management. And then by linking our work to the protection of critical seabed habitat, that helped to them, the fishing industry, to meet eco-certification conditions. So, and now we've actually moved into a framework of cooperative research and co-design. In our next round, South Africa is only on 5.4% protection of its territory to co-design of new seabed management areas. So they're actually collaboratively designed with the trawl industry, and the incentive for them to do that is because, yeah, then they can have access to more lucrative markets. But for us as well, I mean, we don't want degraded areas. So we're not looking to protect seabed areas where there's been 100 years of fishing. We're also more interested, but the fishing technology evolves all the time. So, and there is new grounds that get broken. So I think that proactive identification and having that habitat management element with the big industrial fisheries been very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the things I'm also hearing from you all is thinking outside the boundaries of the MPA. By bringing in more interests, you're able to take a more holistic look and look at multiple types of societal goals that people have in terms of, you know, better access to markets, or even in the Galapagos, that, you know, the community interest in school lunches and those sorts of things by really broadening that out. So thank you. Yeah, Alex.
For the industry here in Ecuador, it's very interesting to see how the behavior changed, or how the approach changed. From the mid-90s, it was a frontal opposition to the creation of the Marine Reserve, refusing to participate in talks, and even to the point of court cases suggesting that, well, we're managed through the IITTC, so, you know, we shouldn't be included in this, which obviously were thrown out because of issues of sovereignty. So, you know, and I would argue that there's a lesson learned there, because maybe if the fishing industry had engaged back in 1998, the Galapagos Marine Reserve wouldn't be as large as it ended up being. And then there may have been some kind of negotiation there. So they found that they were excluded from really, and I've looked at where they were fishing at the time. A lot of their purseine sets were right up against the coasts of the west of Galapagos. So you can understand their concerns. Since then, a couple of things have happened. Well, I mean, time has passed, but also we've found that their catches doubled now that they're fishing outside. So we think that Galapagos, again, there was not necessarily a stock-wide effect, but that Galapagos tends to be, it's almost like a natural huge fish aggregation device with smaller tuna.
Right.
So those tuna were just getting slightly larger and moving offshore and being caught there. So this time round, I think there was maybe a little bit of a lesson learned there, but also Ecuador at the time, the Ecuadorian fishing fleet had the yellow card from the EU and was coming into certain trouble in terms of exporting their goods. And then part of the industry are looking at certification. In fact, one group are already certified through Marine Stewardship Council. So I think the story's changed because you want to get rid of your yellow card, you want to complete your certification, and so I think there was much more aperture for discussion. And finally, I think sometimes it's down to key people who are able to have discussions and work through sometimes quite acrimonious meetings and just keep going and keep those channels open, regardless of how acrimonious they might be. That's, sometimes it is down to individuals, and there were some key individuals during our process here for Hermandad on all sides that really helped push these things forward. And we noticed, I'm not Ecuadorian, so I'm apolitical, but we noticed a huge change when there was a change in government. A new government came in, and within a month, this was ready to go. And that was thanks to their leadership as well.
Okay, Lauren,
So, yeah, please go ahead.
Just because Alex was mentioning individuals, and I'm looking at the screen with Alan, Kerry, and Alex, and if you were to look back at where you started from, like everything that everyone is talking about has taken decades, and it probably didn't come in what you learned at school. And as I'm looking in the question list, it's like what kinds of people or skill sets, and I do think like individuals are critical, and this idea of cross-sector and cross-pollination. I mean, I think we need to really think about how within the educational and academic system, right, people have the way that we can diversify people's backgrounds, political science, interpersonal communication. There's very few, I think, managers, if you haven't worked in either large scale scenarios or like high tension scenarios, like they end up needing to gain those experiences, and then you are someone who either has those natural skills and you level up, or you shrink back and you figure out that it's just not for you. So I think conservation really needs to like change the job descriptions and really switch up how it engages and educates people. It's like back engineering through the pipeline, because I think in so many instances, I agree, if you were to go back, your success is due to probably 1 to 3 people that were able to build the kinds of relationships and be the translators and negotiate in just the perfect way. So I think that's critical.
Yeah.
And related to that, Naya, I just want to ask, because often when we bring people together from different backgrounds or disciplines, they bring different frameworks about how knowledge is processed. And so I'm curious if you all have been involved in situations where science is interpreted differently by different groups, or the analysis or deliberate misinformation, and how have you navigated that or seen it navigated?
I mean, actually, a simple example from the Philippines. In the early years, we all thought the marine scientists would be the ones to help really support marine conservation and help manage the reefs and set up the MPAs and all of that. But we quickly learned that we had to engage the community organizers, the social scientists, the people that were good communicators, the ones that could link the different levels of the community and the government together to make it all work. And once that was learned, this it started to take off, because just having the marine scientist, it almost failed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Other comments, reflections?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, Well, I think one of the things is that, again, I'm through this large scale lens, but when things are political, I think what a lot of times conservation is not ready for is that the opponent side, like they're not playing by the same rules that you're playing by.
Right.
Like when we're talking about communications, they're sitting in a room consciously knowing, like they're creating the spin. It is, wag the dog in that sense of like what there is an agenda and they're creating communications in order to achieve that agenda. Where conservation and science is looking at data and they're looking at how to package that and getting you to understand it. And at the end of the day, it's realizing certain decisions are not going to be made because your data is correct. And so it really is, I think, media training, there's that, as well. But I think it really is, maybe that's the second, if I could buy, fund a position, it really is having a communications strategy and not just at, the site level. In so many of the scenarios that we're talking about, it's not the manager in the site, it's the manager of the site, and then the chain up the chain of all of the other people. And those people then have to be in line and having the same message. And so sometimes, that kind of cohesion can take years to build, but like you need to invest in really understanding actually what the opposition is doing in terms of their communication to do that. And like I said, it's just, I think conservation overall really needs to evolve, and to really consider that kind of research and development in the back of the house that is not about the science of the site, but is truly about the communications, locally, nationally, regionally, and internationally.
Especially true here in Hawaii too.
Hey, yes, we know. Yes, Alan.
And I think, to be honest, I was in a panel in Barcelona at the conference it was about a year and a half ago now, and we were asking about win-win situations and working with communities, and then in the same breath we're talking about protecting 30% of the oceans by 2030. And I said, well, I don't know that just continuing along this line are we going to get there, because I think in general where there's a lot of good work done with communities at that grassroots level, but we're talking about vast tracts of the ocean, and I think we need to start drawing upon experiences with combating the tobacco industry, who for years denied that tobacco was related to cancer. And it's that level, and at some point we're going to have to turn to areas that are more aggressive in litigation, and maybe there isn't a win-win situation in the short term. Maybe there's a win-lose, and that's what litigation is for. So I think once we're looking at these big areas and big industry, then the tactics have to be a little different, or the strategy has to be a little different.
I think this is a really interesting question of how much you rely on that relationship building, which all of you talked about, and it is so important. And when you go to a more combative strategy or fall back to that. And Kerry, I thought your example of that heaven and earth map from the oil industry was really interesting, because they were saying these are the areas we'll live heaven and earth to prevent you from turning into a marine reserve. But you had the relationship where they told you that. And so I think that is a really positive step, right? You weren't having to like guess or surmise, based on people refusing to share information. So I think a lot of it does have to do with kind of having those relationships with which all of you talked about, but also having those political skills to read the room and figure out where you need to maybe employ some different tactics as well. So speaking of different perspectives, I also wanted to give Naya and others a chance to reflect on the value of Indigenous viewpoints and what we can learn from having Indigenous peoples involved as managers and co-managers of MPAs. So Naya, any comments you'd like to make on that?
Yes, I could make many comments. I just feel it, I think again, where I'm really, well, at this point, I think talking about, integration is just the low-hanging fruit. And I think we need to move beyond that. And I think it really is about not just the knowledge system itself, but you need to integrate, right, the people who hold that knowledge in all levels, and not just in the science, but like in the decision making as well. And I think that conservation also has to really think about the commitment that it wants to make. I'll just, in many knowledge systems, but I mean, if we want to say indigenous knowledge systems, right, it's not just the data, it's the whole cultural framework and day-to-day existence around it that gives its relevance. And so when you say yes to that, that's what you're also saying yes to. It's not just like, oh, well, we're integrating this particular indigenous, like I'm standing here, I'm looking, I'm logging, like I'm doing it in an indigenous way. It comes with the whole background. And so I think that that's one of the critical components that is, next in line for conservation. It's actually looking at this like knowledge systems as cultural systems. Like there's people attached to that. There's communities attached to that. It's actually relationship building. It's not data. And so I think, it's wonderful the way that that has come along. But I think that people who've been in the game, long enough, we're all seasoned and mature and can move to the next level. Like, like a video game, we can level up and really think about the different ways of actually not just integrating, but having both Western science and indigenous knowledge. Those are two separate systems. And when you're trying to integrate, often you can water down the effects of both because you're just trying to show that you're doing it versus looking at the scenario. I mean, from an indigenous perspective, in Hawaii, you would look at what you needed to solve the problem, and then you would do that. You wouldn't just be like, oh, let's put these two things together because everyone said to in order to solve this problem. So I think there are some problems that require leading with Western science. I think that there are some that require leading with indigenous or shifting it up. And so I think it's having people that really that come from those spaces and that are willing to have a few hard conversations to really set the stage versus just, I think, surface level talking about integrating knowledge systems. Like we've done that for a while and we need to get more mature and level up.
Yeah, thank you. So I know we're going to close in on our time soon. I wanted to just touch on the unexpected. Often we're working in good faith, we're building relationships, we have a plan, and then something happens. The government changes, our budgets get cut, we have COVID, some disruption, and in some cases, maybe it's positive. Alex, you were noting that, that where you have a political change that helps swing support for conservation, but other times it can take us in the opposite direction. So just would like to hear, as we sort of think about wrapping up, any examples or lessons you've learned from dealing with the unexpected and being able to be resilient and continue in the face of those unexpected challenges.
Well, I can start in the Philippines. Of course, the unexpected recently has been some big storms that have damaged coral reefs, and big waves come in and turn the corals over and really disrupt some of the protected areas that were in fairly good condition. But I will say the communities have come around and decided to try and restore the reef. They still continue to protect them, sort of figured out ways to bring them back and not just give up. So it's a matter of sort of moving with the times. The climate is definitely having more of an impact and people are starting to adjust, but it's a big job, but it's starting to happen. So it's good to see.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, again, cross sector and thinking kind of outside of conservation, I think, we could learn a lot from the creative sector where, you actually are supported for prototyping and having certain things fail. So I know in ecosystems, we can't be flippant about that. And we are in many cases using, public money. And yet I think many times it's hard to think big because the framework around you is so limited. And so I do think that there's something about opening up our ideas of how we approach and really allowing innovation in communities, trying things on small scales. in order to find a solution.
So I know I'm actually gonna. Did you want to say something, Kerry? Please go ahead if you did. And then I have
Well,
one last
just
question.
very quickly, I mean, we actually had some good things come out of COVID, and I was recently in a really interesting reflection where the challenges brought by COVID forced innovation, right? So I won't go into the details, but I think that's also something that we can be aware of, and we just need to be flexible, we need to be adaptive, we need to be innovative.
Can I just add to that? COVID in Galapagos had a maybe unpredictable effect that Galapagos is very highly sectorialized. First, you're tourism or park ranger or conservationist or fisherman, and then you're Galapagan, right? Because it doesn't have a native population. And there's been a lot of effort over the years to try and kind of kickstart an identity. And I don't know whether you can do that. I remember someone printing t-shirts like Galapagos belongs to the Galapagans, which, you know, if you come from where I come from, can be a bit threatening. And yet COVID just cut through everyone, and everyone was affected by COVID in the same way. Doesn't matter if you were a rich tour operator or a poor, you know, person working in the highlands, it just hit everyone, and it also isolated Galapagos. And so I think in terms of creating community and a Galapagos identity, if you think about it, you know, identity is created through hardship, right, and through lived experience, shared experiences. I mean, I used to live in the Orkney Islands, but you know, the community there is thousands of years older than the pyramids. So they've made their mistakes, they've learned from them, and they've built them into their culture. Galapagos is very, very young community. So events like COVID that are a leveler and that everyone shares, and suddenly there's no flights to the islands, and suddenly the fishermen are feeding, you know, the community, and I think there's a lot of value in there which we don't yet recognize. I think that will become evident over the coming years, how important these events are. And I know they're terrible, but it's through these events, predictable or not, or positive or not, that it just levels the playing field, and that's what creates an island identity. And that, I think, has the benefit for people thinking more about being stewards of an area rather than, you know, coming in to exploit.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know we do need to wrap up, but I'm going to give you a chance to just have one last lesson if you want to share. If we can think about perseverance, we often think about managing upward, so dealing with stakeholders, upward would be dealing with agencies and folks who make decisions. Outward is working with our stakeholders and communities, and then inward is making sure our team is prepared. So if you think about those three aspects of resilience, reflecting on any one of them, do you have any advice to the group here about managing for resilience? Your soundbite to the media.
Yeah, I would start with inward. I mean, it's so cliche, right? Like starting with the man in the mirror, cleaning up your bedroom before you worry about everything else. But especially, you know, for large scale, there's always going to be change. But if you start crumbling from within, then you have no shot. But if you actually create a resilient staff, and you create an internal culture that is based on reciprocity and trust and empathy, like people know that they can go to other people for help. I mean, I know it sounds so trite, but we treat the world the way that we do because it's so easy for humans to treat each other so poorly. So if you model like how to be, and like your word means something within your own team, I think you can tackle and more than you think you can, you know.
Great. Alan?
I think in the Philippine case, just sort of as Naya says, maintaining trust within and keeping sort of this, even the small scale operations working well, so they can learn at a local scale, and that can then scale up. In the Philippines, there's so many different needs for different kinds of resilience depending on the situation and the context. But if each one kind of takes their own area and figure out ways to build resilience within that context, it kind of moves on. And we see that happening in many of the sites already as changes are occurring beyond their immediate control. So it's keep it at the local scale.
Great. Alex?
Persevere, keep it transparent. Don't be afraid of having a few rather nasty, acrimonious meetings, because I think in the long term, that helps build trust. because you don't shy away from those. They're part of the process.
Thanks. And Kerry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. Have the difficult conversations. I think that's really key. And then just to keep on fostering those long-term relationships that are needed to solve the problems. You have to stick with it. And also conservation must be caring. You know, I think Naya touched on that, and I think that's been a problem sometimes in our ambitious targets and ambitious pace. We really need to demonstrate that care and keep fostering that trust.
Well, thank you so much, all of you. This was just a great conversation and really wonderful to learn from all of your experience. And thanks to all of you who joined the webinar today, and to Octo for bringing us together.
Thank you.
Very much. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Great.
Thank you,
Good
everyone.
session.
Thank
It
you.
was such a pleasure.
Goodbye.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
Alan, Kerry, Alex, Lauren, John, and Sarah.
Thanks all. It was really cool.